Hello, everyone. My name is Paige Moreau, and I want to welcome you to Museums a la carte and the third installment of Stories from the Outwind, a free four-part lecture series that explores the lives and work of artists featured in past and present Outwind portrait competitions. The Outwind American Portraiture Today exhibit is locally sponsored by Freedom Credit Union, Health New England, and Mass Mutual Foundation. For now, please enjoy today's program, Understanding, Not Understanding, an Artist Conversation on Process, featuring Hugo Crosthwaite, the 2019 grand prize winner of the Outwind Buchiever Portrait Competition, and Natalia García Clark, a recipient of the Commended Artist Award by the National Portrait Gallery, facilitated by Dorothy Moss, curator of painting and sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery.
Thank you so much, Paige. It's a pleasure to be here with Natalia and Hugo. And I'm so grateful to the Springfield Museums for the wonderful programming that you are doing around the Outwind. It's just been absolutely inspiring to watch your programs and hear from the artists and think more deeply about the art of portraiture. I am honored to be with Hugo and Natalia today. As Paige said, Hugo is the first prize winner of the 2019 Outwind Buchiever Portrait Competition, which I directed and co-curated with my colleague Taina Caragol. And Natalia is a commended artist in the exhibition. This is a highly competitive process, and I just want to give you a little bit of background on how it works. We have just closed the call for entries for the 2022 Outwind Buchiever Portrait Competition, which is directed by Taina Caragol and co-curated with Leslie Urania and Taina Caragol. We received thousands of entries. We are just starting to sort through the very first phase of the jury process. And I have to say, it is unbelievable what artists are doing with the art of portraiture. This competition and exhibition expands notions of portraiture and reaches broad audiences. It was the gift of Virginia Outwind Buchiever, who endowed the competition after being a 20-year docent at the National Portrait Gallery. And we are so grateful to her and to her family for continuing this outstanding legacy. We invite jurors to work with our curatorial team. And in 2019, the jurors included Byron Kim, who is an artist and senior critic at the Yale School of Art, Harry Gamboa Jr., who is an artist, writer, and faculty member at the California Institute of the Arts, Lauren Haynes, curator of contemporary art at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and Jefferson Pender, artist and professor of sculpture and contemporary practices at the School of Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. We also had on our jury from our internal curatorial team, Brandon Brain Fortune, the former chief curator at the National Portrait Gallery. I served on the jury, and my colleague Taina Caragol. There were 2,675 entries with 46 finalists. And as you can see, we had a variety of media. We are really excited to see the ways that artists are using different kinds of materials and taking both academic approaches to portraiture, but also highly conceptual approaches. And today I would say that Hugo and Natalia represent the more conceptual approach to the portrait. We were all in agreement that they were definitely among the top of these 2,675 entrants. Their work really stunned the jury. The process involves a lot of behind the scenes deliberations, standing for hours in a warehouse looking at the entries that have made it to the semifinalist round. For the video review, we sit in a room and we watch the video entries on a monitor, which is not always the way they're intended to be shown. Both Natalia and Hugo's work is projected usually. So it's interesting we have to think about how these works will look in our spaces and the visual impact they will have And as we are selecting the finalists, we're also creating a show, we're creating an exhibition. So we think about how the work relates to the other work that's being selected and how it will come together in a cohesive way. This is a still from Hugo's portrait of Berenice Chavez that won first prize. And Hugo, I'm not going to show the clip of this because we have some other videos to share, but I'd love for you to just talk about what brought you to this work and why you chose to portray Berenice in this hand-drawn animation.
Well, yes, I'm happy to do so. Well, this piece in particular was kind of inspired of my practice of my sketchbook. Usually I live in San Diego, Tijuana, but my studio is in Tijuana, Mexico. And since 2012 or so, part of my practice has been to just go with my sketchbook, and sit in the streets of Tijuana, especially in Revolucion and near Cathedral and some other streets like in the center of Tijuana, and just sit there and draw people, no? And I'm not a very formal draftsman. Basically, I just try to draw the faces, and then as I'm drawing, I get bored and I start composing things, no? And part of my practice was just to do drawings and just look at people and start composing narratives. But then, of course, as I was sitting there drawing, sometimes people would look at me with the sketchbook, and I'm like, very intent like this, and they thought, I'm taking notes. Maybe I'm police. I don't know. So then there was always this kind of reaction of, they're curious what I'm doing. Sometimes it would be very confrontational. And as part of that, I would show them, I'm just drawing, and the beautiful thing about, presenting artwork and sharing is that, I would present what I'm doing, show them my sketchbook, and then they would tell me their story. They wanted to share something with me. So then they would say, these are beautiful drawings. Oh, well, let me tell you, I'm coming from Oaxaca and I tried to do this and that, and they would tell me their story. So then those stories that they would tell me started feeding into my own sketchbook and into my own practice. So then part of it was that I was improvising a narrative on my sketchbook, but then also I was incorporating these stories. And then at some point, like 3 years ago, I met Berenice Sarmiento Chavez. She approached me and I showed her my sketchbook and we talked for a couple of hours. And in there, she told me her story, and her story involved her misadventures of crossing into the United States illegally and then finding work, and then at some point getting into serious trouble and then getting deported back to Tijuana. And then she's still fighting to get back to the United States. But when she was telling me her story, it had a lot of exaggeration. It had a lot of elements that, that you kind of questioned that, maybe they're not true. But it didn't matter because the way she told me this was like a very epic story, like a very heroic, where she's the protagonist and she goes through a lot of trials and tribulations and she's still fighting, So then I heard her story, and it just stayed in my mind. And then later on, 3 years later, I hear about this opportunity for the Outwin Portrait competition, and I decided, I had been working on these stop motion drawing animations where I had been telling stories about the border, and especially I had this project working of the Tijuana Bibles, where I would tell stories of from the border. And then at some point I decided, as I started thinking about this idea of portraiture as how not necessarily the likeness of who we are, but who we are as stories.
I love it.
Like when we present ourselves, we have a story that we tell ourselves. Every morning we look ourselves in the mirror and we have a story to tell ourselves. Like, I'm a good person or something like this. So then I thought the story is the portrait. So then I decided to tell her story through this animation, this stop motion drawing animation that tells her, it's not her likeness, but it's her adventure and what she went through crossing into the United States, getting into trouble, and then getting deported at the end. So then that's the story that I presented here at the portrait of Berenice Sarmiento Chavez. No, her story as her portrait.
And it was so striking to us as jurors when we first saw this, because it was so unusual. It wasn't like anything we had seen, and the way that you present her story and her journey and her courage, her despair, but her resilience really captured not only her as a person and her strength, but also this moment in time that we were all experiencing with so many discussions about the border and so much discussion about immigration. So you were not only capturing her, but a story that was urgently in the news and that needed to be told through the human lens. And that is so much of the power of that work. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen this work, to watch it online. It is available through the Springfield Museum's website and through the portraitcompetition.si.edu website for the exhibition. So I just want to move to a work, Hugo, that you said brought you to this idea of creating stop motion animation. This is a mural project that you created in Chicago. So let's play the video and then we can hear more about this project. So I think it's just such a beautiful piece and so fascinating in its performance of a mural. I mean, you're really, and performance I know is a large part of your practice. So tell us about that mural project and how it led you to stop motion animation.
Well, this notion of presenting muralism as performance is something that I started in around 2009. And like everything I do, I never plan anything, and things just kind of happen. So then basically I started doing these things because I would get invited to shows and I wouldn't have any work to present. So then usually it was something that there were exhibitions that would happen sometimes in Brooklyn where you would go into a space and artists would present their work. But because I didn't have work, I would, oh, well, let me do something on the wall. I would do a drawing or a mural. And then at the end of the show, because nothing was commissioned, it was just something that would have to be taken down, I would just paint them over, destroy them, no, erase them. No? So then I decided, well, I like this. There was a lot of interest when I would go into the space and start drawing on the wall. There was more interest in the process of people seeing me do this than actually just looking at the mural. So then I decided, well, there's something to this, to the performance of creating a mural. And also as a Mexican artist, the quintessential Mexican artist is a muralist. So I decided, well, I want to have this new perspective into muralism, presenting more of the process of creating a mural as a performance. So then I started going, when I would propose this project, I would go into the space and wear this shirt that would say Hugo Rótulos. And people wouldn't know if that's my name. They thought my name is Hugo Rótulos, or Rótulos in Spanish means sign painter. So then sometimes people would think that I was somebody who was hired by the artist to create this mural. So then was this kind of theater, no? It's this character that goes into this space and then just improvises a narrative on the wall in a very organic way. And of course, I would go into a space, and in 2 weeks, the place would be open. People would come in and come out, and they would see me with a ladder, doing a painting, doing a mural, and creating a narrative. And of course, people would come in and talk to me, how much are they paying you to do this? Or, they wouldn't know exactly who I was. And then through this conversation, that conversations would influence the narrative in the mural also. So then I thought it was this wonderful experience of how it's not just me coming with a proposed idea, but I would just go and start a drawing, start a narrative, and then how people reacted to it, and they would tell me their stories, they would talk to me, then that would also influence the narrative that was on the wall.
I love this idea of improvisation, and how improvisation is really integral to your work. The way that people see you and encounter you creating work, whether it's in your sketchbook or on the wall, and their story ends up somehow becoming part of the work, if you are, engaging in a way that allows for that. And we'll talk about this later, Natalia, with you, where your work is very different from that. It's more deliberate in your approach, more planned. And I think that's an interesting topic to return to, in terms of portraiture and time-based media. Now I'm going to move to the last video, which is your newest work, or work in process during this quarantine period. Hugo, would you like to say a few words before I play the sketchbook?
Sure, yes. This is a project that I started precisely when the pandemic started, and we were all in lockdown. So then it's basically a project called Dibujos de Cuarentena, a quarantine drawing sketchbook. So then it's these stop motion drawing animations of a drawing that I do in one day on my sketchbook. And then of course, my intent was to do these 30-second fragments of video that present 40 days of 40 drawings in a sketchbook. And as I was doing this stop motion drawing animation, it had this interesting dichotomy of the video, of doing this, of seeing this animation, but then also seeing this very intimate process of drawing and creating a narrative and creating a story. And so then at some point, my intention is to present these 30-second videos in 40 screens. So then they would have this idea of kind of, this, it has kind of this intention of surveillance, almost like exploring something that's very intimate. Like right now, our lives are kind of presented in screens, like what we're doing right now. We're seeing ourselves through screens, but here is this very personal, very humanistic element of the sketchbook and the drawing presented in this format of quarantine and this moment that we're living today, which is through screens.
And one point, music is a key part of your work, and we haven't talked about that yet, but before I play this, tell us what the sound is.
The sound is me recording a music school in Tijuana. So then you're listening somebody trying to get through a piece in music in the piano, trying to practice this constant repetition, which is also very reminiscent of this process of drawing also, which is the notion of a sketchbook is this notion of practice and how we repeat things to get to the final piece. And then also it has this element of something that you're repeating and you're repeating, but you're not getting right. You're making mistakes, and that's why through repetition you're hoping to get to the end of it. So then it had this wonderful, I thought, combination of this element of frustration and practice being presented with the sketchbook, and the drawing also having this element of frustration of trying to create a narrative, and also the shakiness of the animation. I thought it just went really well together.
All right, let's watch. a very beautiful work. And I am so struck by the immediacy. The viewer of your work feels like they're in it with you, and there's suspense created, which I think, Natalia, relates to your work. This suspense. You have very different approaches, but I also feel a sense of suspense when I look at your work. And so I would love for you to say just a few words about how you, in your mind, your work relates to Hugo's practice of portrayal through time-based media, with this element of suspension. And also, we talked yesterday about disappearance and erasure.
It's really interesting because I think Hugo's work and my work are so different from one another. I think our approach to making work and our initial kind of motivation and everything is just so different. But in a way, I can see similarities in topics. Disappearance is always, it's an interesting word because it has such a broad number of connotations. It can be like a magic trick, an illusion. It can be something really grave as a state crime. It can be as real as death itself. So I think that's probably where the suspense or the kind of tension that is built through these works comes from. So I would say that is a connection between our works.
And I agree. And it's just, I think it's a profound connection, actually. This is a still from your self-portrait that was commended in this Outwin. And I want to play the piece, and there's no sound to this piece, so I'll play the beginning and then we can continue the conversation as it plays.
So should I introduce the work or?
Yes, yes.
You want me to talk about? Okay. Basically for this piece, when I was thinking about making this piece, I was thinking about different categories in the history of art and how I could merge two different genres. I was thinking about portraiture and landscape and how humans exist within landscape, but also how humans create landscapes, because landscapes are our perception of what a landscape is or what a landscape looks like. So I was thinking a lot about that. I was thinking about the imaginary of portraiture, the imaginary of landscapes and what different spaces mean. And then thinking about the gaze, the human gaze, as a mechanism for measurement. So as I was saying, how we create portraits through our gaze, also how we create people through our gaze, and how I guess our experience or our perception of reality is subjective to us, yet dependent on that of other people. So how we exist according to other people.
I think it's amazing that, you know, we come into existence in other people's eyes. And here you have a self-portrait that ends up as a landscape.
Right.
And when we watched this as jurors, we also, you know, we had seen Hugo's work and we were thinking about the border and discussions about migration and immigration. And we knew that you were an artist working between California and Mexico. But I remember when Taina and I were writing the text to accompany the exhibition and we asked you about that. You said, no, this work is not about the border. But
no, that's not what I mean, it is.
It is, but it's not explicitly commenting on, or what would you?
I'm always really careful in my work with the level of ambiguity I want it. I kind of like to move the conversation in a direction by playing around with symbols and imaginaries and so on. But precisely because this word, disappearance, it has such strong connotations, you know, in Latin America, it can mean something completely different than it can in the United States, etc. I wanted to open up the work to a broader conversation. So it isn't that it isn't about, it can be about, it's clearly the border landscape, you know, there's no, why would I deny that? But I think once you move the conversation in that direction, then a whole lot of other possibilities are removed from what the work could become.
Yes. And you're still playing with landscape and newer work, and using landscapes in terms of backdrops. And let me forward to the next slide so I could share. This is just a clip of a newer piece that you're working on. Okay. And why don't you introduce it, so we know what we're seeing before I play it?
So this video is from a larger series of videos titled Internal Conflict, which consists of trapping flies inside acrylic boxes and recording their flutter trying to escape. And the video will end eventually when the fly finds its way out of the box. So the video got started because I one morning woke up and I wrote down a list of dreams, because I record my dreams on my phone every morning. So I wrote all of the images down, and then I started finding connections between them, like topics and things that created some sort of different perception of myself. They created an internal conflict. And then I had this image that there was a fly flapping around in my head. And the desire to turn that into experience about confinement is what led me to make this series of videos that have to do with time and the process of waiting, time as accumulated tension and the process of waiting, and how feeling time pass by is a fundamental part of being alive. So you can show a small segment of the clip if you want.
So the fly is a stand-in for the self in a way. I mean, and I love the fact that you actually auditioned flies.
Yes.
For the piece. So here is a clip of the flies being auditioned in cups, right?
Right. It was an extremely frustrating process, actually, to find the right type of fly. You would expect them to be great protagonists, but once you put them in the box, they kind of just like sit around and rub their legs together, and they never actually fly, which is what I need to do. So I spent a lot of time actually like reading about flies and categorizing them into species, and then categorizing them into gender, if they were male or female. I conducted all of these crazy experiments and like, you know, modified the size of the hole in the boxes. And I just went crazy like a scientist. I was just like catching flies and stuff. And then I realized that flies, which is really interesting, are like humans. They have personalities and you just have to audition them and find the right fly.
So what did you learn? How did you choose the fly that ended up being in this piece?
Dorothy Moss, I can't describe to you how many flies I filmed. So many flies. So I just filmed a bunch of videos until the right fly came along.
And Natalia, how long will this piece be ultimately when it's finished?
It's finished. This one is finished. This one's like 8 minutes long. Okay. But then I have another one that's looking at the internal conflict from outside of a home, looking in through a window. And one, it's kind of like when the fly escapes, it finds itself trapped in the larger box of a home. And then I have a third one that plays with different sized boxes and what these different dimensions do for sound.
I think it's fascinating, and I can't wait to watch the entire piece. um, so, and again, it brings up this idea of improvisation in time-based media, because even though you've planned very carefully, auditioned the flies, you deliberately approach this, there is a spontaneity in this piece, which I think is part of what makes it what it makes it endearing and whimsical, but also unnerving, in a way. And so I just wondered, Hugo, what do you, how would you respond to the idea of spontaneity, or suspense, in Natalia's work?
I find very interesting in terms of how, for example, the fly. It's in English. The fly. It's most beloved virtue that it's free. It can fly. In Spanish, mosca, it means something different, something else. But here in this video, the context of us living right now in pandemic, being locked in, but then there's this creature that has the name of the virtue that we all wish we could do. We could fly. But then also the fly is this insect of how do you say, of something that's decrepit, something that's attracted to something that we don't like, death even. The fly is an instrument that connotes something that's spoiled or something that's dying. So then I love this juxtaposition of what's happening here in the video. The fakeness of the portrait of the landscape painting, and then this little animal that represents this notion of freedom and flying, trapped in its box, trying to get out. And then until it actually gets out. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Hugo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of you and your work have a fine balance between light and dark, in terms of there's a sense of mystery, there's allusions to death, but there's also a sense of humor, and some whimsical moments and some humorous moments. I see humor running through both of your work in very different ways, and I would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, also I think there's an eloquence in process, like you were talking a bit earlier about the whimsical, the element of the video, the fly. In my case, it was the eloquence of a beautiful drawing. Like, people would tell me their story because they liked the way I was drawing, and they would tell me really hard things. And even the portrait of Berenice Sarmiento Chavez, when you see the video, it's a hard story. It's a kind of a tragic story of things that happen, but people are open to see it because they see the beauty of the drawing, or they see the eloquence of the drawing. And so then sometimes it humanizes, at least in my intent with the Berenice video was to humanize the story. Yeah, you hear about 50,000 refugees coming into the border. They're just numbers. Or even right now with COVID, with the pandemic, you hear about 500 deaths. No, we're nearing 500 deaths. So it's just numbers. But when you take one individual story and present it in a very eloquent way, I'm hoping that it opens up more this humanizing aspect of it, that you feel for what's happening to each individual.
Yeah, Natalia, did you want to say anything about that?
I forgot the initial question.
Well, this idea of this tension between light and dark, and life and death, and the dichotomies in both of your work.
Right. What would I have to add to that? I guess I really do think our works are so different. I think Hugo's work is kind of like his hands are his main motivation for making the work. I don't know how he can like think of these images and in real time make them happen. To me, that's incredible. In my approach, it's always just thinking about death. I think about death a lot, which sounds really like dark and existential. It's not like that at all, you know. I just kind of grapple with these really overarching questions, and that transfers over into my work in humor somehow. I'm not sure why that happens. It just happens. But I guess at the end, Hugo's work and our work is dealing with human beings in really different ways. Hugo's work is dealing with like real human beings who he finds and has a connection with and is able to portray through all of these human things, which and it's never about presenting people. It's about presenting all of these series of it's presenting life as movement or life as a choreography of sounds or an experience, a time-based experience where you have to wait for something to happen. So they are about human beings and death in just completely different ways.
I agree. And I think what makes the Outwin exhibition and competition so dynamic and exciting and so beloved among our visitors and when it travels among the visitors of the museums where it ends up is that these human stories are told in such different ways. And often there are moments where you see an artist grappling with death or other very heavy topics, but doing so in a sensitive way, in a humanistic way, through the story of someone's life. And that's a very different, that kind of experience in a museum space in front of a work of art creates a very different kind of dialogue or conversation than listening to news stories or reading stories, you know, in the paper. And you see statistics as Hugo was saying earlier about COVID or about refugees, but to put a face or to put, not if there's no face, to put an idea and a human experience to those stories is so eye-opening and creates such powerful connections. So I'm really inspired by both of your work. I think that you bring so much of yourself and your life experience. We haven't yet talked directly about the fact that you both live between Mexico and California. And I just, in closing my questions, would love to hear about that experience, especially during this pandemic time. Have you been able to go to both places?
Well, well, it's like I mentioned earlier, part of my practice is to actually sit outside and look at people and hear their stories. And yes, during this pandemic, I have not been able to do that. So then a part of this notion of the drawing sketchbook, the quarantine drawing sketchbook, is also this frustration of not being able to be outside and making up these stories on my page is through this improvisation of. I hope I'm telling the stories that I would think I would be hearing in the streets, you know. But it's kind of like this inertia of just, you know, a practice that I've been doing, just translating it into what I'm doing here in my studio, just, you know, in my table. And then, you know, one of the you know, me trying to draw and take pictures of as I do the drawing, I was holding down the sketchbook, and when I was doing the stop motion drawing animation, my hand would appear kind of like caressing the sketchbook. And I thought that was like, yes, like, you know, how this preciousness of the book and me also being out there collecting stories here is just this very, you know, magical way of the drawing appearing on the page, but my hand is constantly caressing, you know, the sketchbook, which I thought it added this wonderful kind of humanistic element of something precious, but then presented through a video, which is also kind of cold and detached in a way. So yes.
I love seeing you've been holding up your sketchbook and it's small. It's so small. And, you know, when I see your work projected, I think of these monumental mural type figures, but really you're creating them in this tiny handheld on these pages, and there's something so intimate about that and so different about holding a book and turning through the pages than watching the projection. So I'll be curious to see your next project with all of the different monitors, and how that will feel compared to the portrait of Berenice.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping it will look like another mural, like this
Oh,
artificial digital mural of
brilliant.
drawing, of something as intimate and small as a drawing, but presented in 40 screens, something big, and yeah, so another mural. Yeah.
Exciting. Natalia, regarding the place, being in Mexico during the pandemic, how has it been for you?
Well, it's been hard because most of the people I know and most of the people I collaborate with and most of my work is in the United States. Of course, it's easier to live in Mexico just because the rent isn't like half of what I make. But I would say it's been hard because a lot of my work has been halted. I was working on this installation with an engineer in Los Angeles, and that was halted. But it's also been great because I've come up with new projects from confinement. I have this fly project, and then for some reason I thought I might go to the Arctic. That was a great idea. I was like, what can I make right now? Going to the Arctic, perfect, So it's allowed me to think up of new things I can do. But I'm usually moving between Mexico City and Los Angeles. I feel like it's great that we can do this today. It's yeah.
I mean, the benefit of this time of confinement is that we actually end up in these conversations, which bring us all together, and we are all in one place. And so I do think there have been so many productive conversations and connections and inspiration that has come from this moment. I know we have some questions coming in from our audience, and Paige is going to moderate those.
Yeah, so everybody who's joining in from home, the Q&A session has begun. So if you want to pop your questions into the Q&A box, we do have one already from Rosetta Cohen, who asks, Hugo, can you speak about how erasure operates in your work? In both your Outwin piece and the new one, you end up erasing what you've made, and they ask why.
Well, originally erasure was just because, it was something that I had to do. At the end of the show, I had to erase the mural, especially with this notion of improvised mural in a space. But then when I decided to incorporate the erasure into the performance, then I stopped thinking about it as an erasure. It was more of me creating the narrative on the wall in a very organic way. And then the way of erasing it would not actually be erasing, but it would be adding to the mural, painting these white squares. So kind of the way I approached the mural was kind of like how a poet approaches a poem. You string together words. So then in this case, in the mural, I was just stringing together details of people that were telling me things and things that was coming up at the moment. So then it was kind of this collage that is being improvised on the wall. And then the moment I finished the narrative, then I would start deconstructing the mural by painting these white squares and kind of in a very measured way, kind of deconstruct the mural, not destroying it, but deconstructing it. Like sometimes in poetry, there's this notion of deconstruction, the deconstruction of a poem, where you isolate the words to examine, to study the elements of it. So then by painting these white squares, I was kind of isolating the elements in the mural, destroying the narrative, and kind of it was an organic piece that started becoming an abstract piece, which in the end, it became a concept piece, where it's just the idea of a mural, because the mural is still there, but it's just painted over with these white squares, and it just becomes a memory. And then later on, when I started documenting these mural performances, that's where this notion of the stop motion drawing animation kind of occurred to me as this mural that lived, died, and now lives in an afterlife, in this digital form, as a memory, or I would post it on the internet. So now it's in this ethereal place, the internet. So it's not really destroyed or erased, it's more just transformed.
I have another question coming from Juliana. This one's for Natalia. And they ask, what type of personality were you looking for in the final flies to choose to film? Did species of flies have similar personality traits? Did you name the flies?
I didn't name the flies. There were too many of them and they all look so similar. I wish I could. I did kind of become attached to the good ones. What I was looking for was a good performance, really. I was looking for something that the fly would do that is interesting inside the box. But also at an auditory level, I was looking for a fly, like a bigger fly that could make a richer sound. There's a lot of technical things that go into such a simple video, and one of them is capturing the subtle sounds of a fly. Not all microphones can do that. So having a bigger fly with more energy is definitely something I was looking for.
So interesting. Okay, I have another question from Roger, and they ask of Hugo, can you talk about the length of time and hours each day you spent on the large mural? Also, what were your references for the people you depicted?
Well, the mural performances usually was the length of a show. So usually like a show at a gallery or at a place would be like 30 days or so. So then I would spend about 3 weeks creating the mural, as me going as this actor, as this with the shirt Hugo Rótulos, and performing during the gallery hours. And then at the end, then the last 3 days or 4 days of the exhibition, I would start deconstructing the mural. So then people would come in. I would always be there at the gallery, at the space during when it was open, and I would be there drawing, painting, and then or you would see me deconstructing the mural. And funny enough, people would come in at the end when I was deconstructing the mural, and because they were seeing this grid, they thought I was actually starting the mural, because usually the traditional way of creating a mural is, you have a sketch and you do this grid, and then you trespass that to the wall. So then it was very interesting to to tell them at the end, no, this is the end of the mural and I'm actually deconstructing it. So, but it was an interesting conversation. But yeah, usually the whole process would take 30 days or so.
I have a question for both of you. In this series that we've been doing, where we've been talking with people who have participated in the portrait competition, we've had kind of varying levels of people who consider themselves portraitists and those who kind of came about creating a portrait. And I wonder how the two of you see yourselves as either being portraitists or just artists in general, and what was it about this year and these two pieces of work that you felt really fit the kind of call for art for the portrait competition?
Just in terms of portraiture, of being a portraitist, I don't consider myself a portraitist because I don't think I have the skill. Yes, I'm a figurative draftsman, but I am not really good at capturing somebody's likeness. I don't have the discipline to do that. Usually my drawing is just improvised, and even if you're standing in front of me, I'll try to recreate your face, but in the end, I just don't have the discipline to do it. So then that's why, in a way, I was worried, when I thought, well, I want to propose something for the Outwin. If I try a portrait, like a straight portrait, it's not going to work. It's going to be awful. So then I decided, well, how can I circumvent this? And that's where I came with this idea of, well, portrait is our story. So in a way, it was kind of like my lack of skill as a portraiture that led to the video and presenting this as the portrait.
Lack of skill. Yeah, right. I can't even imagine how you come up with, it's incredible to me that you can just in real time I don't know how you even do that. For me, definitely don't consider myself a portrait artist or any kind of genre artist. I find it really hard to make work thinking about which genre it will fit into. I think it would be easier for me to market myself and for people to talk about what I make if I did that. But it's just, I'm never thinking about that when I'm making work. I'm kind of just, I have all of these curiosities and questions and sentiments, and I try to find ways of expressing, regardless of the medium and regardless of the genre. So I do end up moving between mediums a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you both. I don't have any further questions from the audience at this time. So I want to thank all three of you for being here and having this lovely discussion. It's so great to hear from the artists and get the perspective of the curator and kind of the process of the whole portrait competition. So thank you all for your insights. And I just want to remind everybody that next week is our last installment of the Stories from the Outwind series. Again, it's called Understanding Not Understanding, an artist conversation on process. Or sorry, that was this week. It's Portraits with Presence, and that one is with Nikisha Durrett and Julianne Wallace-Sterling. So I hope you can all join us. And again, thank you to the three of you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Paige, and thank you, Natalia and Hugo. And I didn't mention one thing that's important. Stay tuned, because part of Hugo's prize for winning first place is to create a commission portrait for our collection. So that is to come, something to look forward to. So thank you all. And
thank you guys so much for having us. And thanks for everybody who is listening to everything we say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.